Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. We would like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. On behalf of Chairperson Vasan Srinivasan and the Board of Directors of Mental Health Foundation Australia, I welcome you all and our distinguished guests to the Foundation's National Teachers Symposium, our very first symposium for National Mental Health Month. My name is Christina Chia, and I'm very honored to be your MC for this symposium. I am the Vice Chair of the Australian Multicultural Ambassador Program in Victoria and also have been the Multicultural Ambassador for the past 4 years. National Mental Health Month is an initiative of the Foundation to advocate for and raise awareness of Australian mental health. It is an important time where the Australian community comes together to raise awareness that #mental health matters. The National Mental Health Month is unlike many other mental health awareness campaigns. It aims to bring us together in a nationwide conversation about mental health and maintain this high concentration on Australian mental health for the entire month of October. Today's National Symposium is focused on raising awareness about mental health and well-being amongst principals, teachers, and educators. According to Associate Professor Peter Stapleton in SBS documentary, A Teacher Changed My Life, over 50% of Australian teachers suffer from anxiety, and nearly 1/5 suffers from depression. As a multicultural ambassador and a chief operating officer and principal of a coaching college, I am not surprised about that fact. And I can totally relate to the increased stress, anxiety, and workplace pressures related to principals and teachers. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed unprecedented challenges on the education sector. Teachers and principals are faced with overwhelming responsibilities of their own health, the well-being of their students, and at the same time, managing and adhering to ever-changing government health directives. So without further ado, I'm really honored to kick off the National Symposium on Teachers' Mental Health as we hear from our expert speakers on their views and various support services available to our teachers and principals. So please enjoy this short video showcasing the Foundation's 90 years journey promoting better mental health for all. Thank you.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Mental Health Foundation Australia's journey began 90 years ago. It dawned in 1930 with just a founder and vision, which was to reach and impact Victoria. Now we have a presence in all states and changing lives for over 100,000 people throughout Australia. Our organisation's biggest initiative yet is our National Mental Health Month. Our month-long initiative is to advocate and raise awareness on Australian mental health. Our vision is to recharge and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and facilitate positive and non-judgmental discussions surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. With the theme being Mental Health Matters, the awareness is cumulative. In 30 events we have organised to reach the community in all mental health subject matters affecting our lives today. To further continue our journey of 1,000 miles, the Walk for Mental Health has transitioned from a Victoria-only walk to being a nationwide community walk, where anybody from anywhere in Australia can connect with us, walk with us virtually to spread the impact and awareness of mental health. We pride ourselves with making sure all our programs are for the community and are powered by the community. We have a vast growing network of multicultural ambassadors who are part of our program to further the community voice in promoting positive mental health and well-being. Our multicultural network has inspired our educational and multicultural webinars as an initiative to help power Fidelity to cope with success during the pandemic, to promote the understanding of unique cultural and ethnic heritage in Australia, and the development of culturally responsible and responsive curricula. The Mental Health Foundation of Australia conducted the multicultural research to continue on the development of the fast-growing multicultural totality in Australia. With the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, the MHFA has successfully committed the Power Hour of services and the reach to the community. With the helpline hours extended, we are here to show Australians we can be a shoulder to lean on and can be dialed to assist in all mental health matters. Our impact flows into the COVID-19 meal delivery response with the help of the community, local business and our multicultural ambassadors. It has promoted one vision, which is to serve others before self during this time of uncertainty. With over 45,000 meals delivered, we continue to work with the Department of Health, the Human Services, the Salvation Army and the Australian Multicultural Foundation to continue this success. As we continue to work to deepen understanding.
I would now like to welcome our patron, Carol Crean, to give a welcome address. Carol's career and passion for helping problem young people started as a secondary school science teacher. Transitioning to the Victorian Education Department, working in policy development, it was at this time that Carol ventured into the mental health realm with the Mental Health Foundation Australia and working with the Southern Health Mental Health Program, looking at consumer education to clinicians. In 2017, she became Secretary of the Mental Health Foundation Australia at the amalgamation of the Mental Health Foundation of Australia and the Mental Health Foundation of Victoria, the oldest not-for-profit sector and non-governmental organisation in the mental health sector in Victoria. She was reappointed as a patron of Mental Health Foundation Australia in 2019. Welcome, Carol.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Mental Health Foundation and particularly myself, I would like to welcome all of you to the National Teachers Mental Health Symposium. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Teachers are the critical connections between students and the future. A commendable and rewarding role, but it is a hard gig, coming with pressures and challenges. Many, I believe, are totally unexpected when people go into that profession. Expanding curriculums, time-consuming administration tasks, new skills to learn, particularly in the IT field, behavioural challenges like bullying, and navigating communications between students, parents, and colleagues. Particularly now, COVID-19 has changed the landscape of how teachers deliver their work and how students learn their work. It's not surprising the figures that were mentioned. Over 50% of Australian teachers suffer from anxiety and depression, or nearly 1/5 from depression. For the future, for the community, for students and particularly for teachers, we need to have a discussion about the mental health of teachers. And today I'm very pleased that we have got the calibre of addresses and panel people to have that discussion. There are 5 presenters today. The Honourable Dan Tehan, MP, Minister for Education, Ms Jenny Atta, Secretary, Department of Education, Victoria, Mr Kevin McCoy, CEO, Independent and Assisted Living Australian Unity, Professor Mari Brennan, Honorary Professor of Education, Victoria University, and Dr Norleen Weatherby-Fell, Head of Students Education, University of Wollongong, and Bright. Bright is Building Resilience in Teacher Education Representative. That will be followed by a panel discussion, which Jim Goodin, our Mental Health Foundation Australia Vice Chairperson, with Emeritus Professor Bruce Tong, Patron of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. 2 of our speakers, Professor Mari Brennan and Dr Norleen Weatherby-Fell, and they will be joined by Ravneet Pahwa, Deputy Vice President Global and CEO South Australia Deakin International, and Kelly Luxford, Director Policy, Australian Institute, Teaching and School Learning. I particularly welcome all the dignitaries, educators and participants that are here today and wish everyone a successful symposium. Thank you.
It gives me great pleasure to now introduce the Honorary Dan Tehan, Federal Minister for Education, to officially launch the event. Dan was sworn in as Minister for Education on 28th of August 2018. Dan served as Minister for Social Services from 20th December 2017. Prior to this, he was the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Minister for Defense Personnel, Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Cybersecurity, and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for the Centenary of Anzac. Dan was elected to Federal Parliament in 2010 and has held positions as the Chair of the Parliamentary Joint Commitment on Intelligence and Security, Chair of the Victorian Consultative Panel for the Black Spot Programme, Chair of the Coalition Policy Committee on Economics and Finance, Co-Chair of the Parliamentarians Supporting Cancer Causes, Co-Chair of the Parliamentary Friends of Youth Mental Health, and Chair of the Coalition Friends of Tourism. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear Minister's message on teachers' mental health and well-being. Thank you.
Teachers and principals have a challenging job at the best of times, but the ongoing risks and challenges posed by COVID-19 are exceptional, and I continue to be impressed by how you are all responding. And as much as we're all concerned for our children, please make sure that you are also looking after yourselves. The Australian Government is working with all state and territories and non-government education authorities to ensure our teachers, school leaders, and wider school communities are supported and able to continue to provide high-quality education. The Australian Government initiatives to promote and safeguard the wellbeing of teachers and school leaders have been adapted to provide specific support and to respond to COVID-19. This includes the BU initiative delivered by Beyond Blue in partnership with Early Childhood Australia and Headspace. The initiative has developed a guide for teachers and school leaders to look after students and their own mental health during COVID-19. The Student Wellbeing Hub has been updated with a number of online resources for educators, parents and students to support health and wellbeing. The Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership has developed online resources to help support teachers and school leaders during COVID-19. The Department of Health has published important information on things you can do to take care of your mental health and wellbeing during COVID-19. Our government has also committed almost $2 million to look at ways of addressing the issues of red tape and abuse of teachers and principals. The Australian Government will continue its commitment to promoting and safeguarding the wellbeing of all teachers and school leaders across the country. Thank you for all that you do. I wish you all the best for your discussions today, and I look forward to hearing all about them.
Thank you, the Honourable Dan Tehan, Federal Minister for Education, and a gesture of appreciation and engraved pen will be posted to you, Australian made. I would now like to invite Ms. Jenny Atta, the representing Minister James Merlino, newly appointed Minister for Mental Health. Jenny Atta has been the Secretary of the Department since 2019. Jenny joined the Department in December 2015 as Deputy Secretary, Infrastructure and Finance Services Group. In this role, she was responsible for the management and oversight of the Department's financial, procurement and information technology services, along with strategic advice and planning for state budget processes and infrastructure policy and delivery across the education and training portfolio. Jenny has many years' experience in senior public service leadership roles, notably at the Department of Treasury and Finance, where she led the portfolio analysis function within budget and finance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Jenny Atta.
Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you this afternoon Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking today here in Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And of course I want to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I'm really pleased to be speaking to you today on behalf of the Victorian Minister for Education and the Deputy Premier, the Honourable James Merlino. As Christina has said, last week Minister Merlino was also appointed as Minister for Mental Health. The Minister is strongly committed to teacher and student wellbeing, and I look forward to working with him across the important intersection of these two portfolios. As Secretary of the Department of Education and Training here in Victoria, teacher wellbeing is certainly a top priority. As champions of teacher mental health and wellbeing, you already know the benefits that a focus on mental health provides, both for teachers and for a positive educational and social environment for students. Of course, a focus on teacher mental health is of acute importance this year. It has been a difficult year for Australia and a difficult year for teachers. And can I say for teachers in Victoria, it has been particularly challenging. Many of our schools and teachers have worked so hard to help and support students and families through the challenges of the bushfire season early in the summer, as well as through the coronavirus pandemic. As you know, Victorian schools have had long periods of remote operation over the past few months. We've now, I'm really pleased to say, announced final dates for full return to on-site learning for all students. But teachers during that period have been critical frontline workers in that difficult context. There is, I think, an expectation in the community that teachers will go the extra mile in a difficult situation. That's what good teachers do. And without question, they do. But it's really incumbent on us to remain aware of what the effects of this extra emotional and mental effort can be. As system managers, education system managers, we have to make sure that the right systemic and personal supports are in place when a teacher's job is at its most demanding. Pre-COVID, research out of Bond University last year suggested that Australian teachers already experience symptoms of depression and anxiety at a higher rate than the national average. And it's clear that the pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues across all of the community. A survey of Australians from all states by Monash University in the first month of COVID restrictions indicated that mental health problems were at least twice, or likely to be at least twice as prevalent as in non-pandemic circumstances. And we already know that even without a pandemic, the responsibilities of teachers and school leaders can have a toll on their mental health and wellbeing. And we know that teachers interact with mental health issues in the broader community through their daily professional exchanges on a frequent basis. So it's important that the right supports are in place. Let me touch just briefly on two important occupational mental health and wellbeing programs for our frontline education staff. In Victoria, we developed in 2019 the Safe and Well in Education program, a 5-year plan that aims to systemically enhance health, safety and wellbeing in the teaching workforce. Importantly, that strategy recognises that mental health and wellbeing is just as important as physical wellbeing. It also provides practical support such as implementing better guidance and information around mental health and wellbeing, promoting a new and expanded employee assistance program across our schools, and targeted professional development for leaders to help them create and support mentally healthy workplaces. And to further support our education leadership, we've also developed a dedicated principal health and wellbeing strategy in place now for a couple of years. This strategy acknowledges the unique challenges that school principals face and provides support specifically targeted at their special requirements. This includes proactive wellbeing supervision, which has been extended to include assistant principals in 2020, and a principal mentor program. There is more to do, of course, and critically, I want that to be informed by a conversation with teachers in Victoria. Can I conclude by just acknowledging that the stigma associated with mental health is, I think we all know, still a problem today. It remains one of the most significant barriers to individuals seeking and engaging with the support that they need. And that's why discussions like today are extremely valuable. Having mental health dialogues amongst peers and in the workplace promotes a culture of inclusivity in our workforce and encourages people to attend to take care of their mental health and wellbeing. It's one of the reasons I aim to raise mental health as a key priority in my communications with our education workforce. I want teachers and all education staff to seek help when they need it, to know that they're supported and to know what supports and programs are available to them. So thank you all for being here today. Thanks for contributing to this effort. And thank you for the broader effort you've all made for students across Australia during what has been an immensely difficult year. Your resilience, adaptability, passion and drive in the face of ongoing uncertainty and change has assisted in providing that vital continuity of education across our communities. So thank you once again, and I'll now hand back to Christina.
Thank you, Ms. Jenny Atta. And as a gesture of appreciation, an engraved pen will be posted to you. I would now like to invite Mr. Mike Hutton, Squire, Executive General Manager, Health Services, Australian Unity Independent and Assisted Living. Mike Hutton, Squire joined Australian Unity in 2012 and became Chief Executive Officer, Independent and Assisted Living in July 2017. In 2015, Australian Unity established its mental health service to treat anxiety and depression for people having experienced a recent hospitalization. Now, nearly 60% of participants have recovered from their symptom after having completed the program. Kevin and his team are committed to evidence-based interventions that are proven to work and support people leading their best lives. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome National Mental Health Month's major sponsor, Australian Unity's CEO for Independent and Assisted Living, Mr. Mike Hutton, Squire.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Christina, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody, and a sincere welcome to everyone who's joined us today on this important topic of teachers' mental health. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands on where we're meeting today, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also want to offer my condolences to those who have lost family since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. My thoughts and support go out to all those families. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Hutton, Squire, and I work for Australian Unity. I also wanted to acknowledge the work of the Mental Health Foundation of Australia and their great work in the mental health space. This is Australian Unity's second year of involvement with the foundation, and we look forward to tackling some of the most challenging social issues together. Mental Health Month, held in October each year, gives us an opportunity to raise awareness about mental health and well-being. It's our chance to promote activities and ideas that can have a positive impact on our daily lives and the lives of others. And today I've been asked to speak to you about teachers' mental health. As the GM of Australian Unity's clinical care division, which is called Remedy Healthcare, we work very closely with both the Teachers Health Insurance Fund and Teachers Union Health Fund. And through these partnerships have supported thousands of teachers physically and mentally through their journeys over the last 12 years. Mental health is highly invasive and can be very destructive, not just to the individual, but to the whole family and community, and can often rob them of happiness, sometimes without any meaningful end in sight. As Christina said, recent research has shown that over half of Australian teachers suffer from anxiety and nearly 1/5 are depressed. And much of this is related to stress encountered in their workplace. In particular, this year has been perhaps the most challenging. COVID-19 will likely have long-term and profound impacts on Australians' mental health and well-being. In fact, according to the Royal Australian College of General Practice, antidepressant prescriptions have increased by 30% year on year, which is a very concerning early indicator of the impact. But teachers not only carry their own mental health challenges, but that of their students too. In the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry, it further highlights the substantial deterioration in youth mental health since the beginning of the pandemic. In their study, nearly 70% of youth researched met the screening criteria for an internalizing mental health disorder. So over and above the severe economic impact felt by the pandemic, it is perhaps the mental health impact that will be felt much greater and for much longer as our teachers and young people overcome what has occurred this year. And as we now look forward to returning to face-to-face education across many parts of Australia, school and university is the place for academic, social, and cultural engagement. It's where they learn skills for their future careers, and it's where they spend time with their mates and where they can learn about their local and global environment. But the school we return to will be very different to the one we left at the start of the year. Therefore, having healthy teachers is as important to having healthy students. There's also more work we need to do to close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians and improve mental health and well-being of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. Aboriginal youth experience a suicide rate that is double the non-Indigenous rate. And so as a nation, we need to improve our efforts to address these inequalities and not just close the gap, but exceed the gap. For a long time, Australian Unity has recognised the importance of high-quality mental health support services. In 2015, after conducting a global search, we adopted the UK's National Health Service model of low-intensity behavioural therapy called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. Working with Flinders University, we contextualised it to the Australian market and adapted it for more acute clients, as we knew that most participants would enter the program having recently been discharged from hospital. The program is directly addressing the challenges with increased healthcare utilisation by enabling people to recover from anxiety or depression in their own home and stay recovered. Results from our intervention have shown encouraging results and have been published in a peer-reviewed journal as evidence that the intervention delivers recovery rates of greater than 60%. The MindStep program's evidence of success is important in the Australian healthcare context because it provides linkage between primary care and acute care. A national model of stepped care between various settings is needed to ensure Australians don't bounce in and out of the hospital system, but develop skills for self-management and their mental health that can last a lifetime. Furthermore, lived experience and evidence-based interventions are crucial in ensuring public and private health dollars are appropriately utilised and that low-value care is removed. Australian Unity is also demonstrating its ongoing commitment to the mental health and well-being of Aboriginal Australians and communities through its recent investment in the development of a new mental health program called Healing Minds. Healing Minds is an initiative that leverages our existing experience in mental health services and Aboriginal community care. Australian Unity established the Aboriginal home care business in 2018 to provide culturally appropriate care, and last year delivered over 300,000 hours of care. The Healing Minds program commenced in July of this year, and over the coming months will be rigorously analysed to determine the improvements it is delivering for Indigenous people. And then we also plan to adapt the program for culturally and linguistically diverse communities and to respond to the growing needs for mental health support that is proven to work. In closing, Mental Health Month is an important opportunity to raise awareness about the impacts of mental ill health and the range of supports available that can improve someone's sense of well-being. Australian Unity is committed to ensuring that we develop and continue to innovate new ways for people to access and receive effective treatments that work to alleviate their mental health symptoms. As a workplace, it is important to acknowledge the important role schools and universities have in the prevention of declining mental health for both teachers and for students. Employers should seek to provide mental health support services not just in a crisis, but also services that build on an individual's capacity to self-manage their mental health. This is developing skills not only for themselves, but for their colleagues and students. It's also important to maintain a focus on adopting services and programs that are grounded in evidence and have long-lasting, meaningful impact to people's mental health. I'd like to thank the Mental Health Foundation Australia for their unwavering commitment to improving better mental health for all Australians. Thank you, and back to you, Christina.
Thank you, Mr. Mike Hutton, Squire. And as a gesture of appreciation, an engraved pen will be posted to you. I would now like to introduce Professor Marie Brennan, Honorary Professor of Education at Victoria University. Marie Brennan started work in education as a humanities teacher in Victoria Technical Schools. She subsequently moved to the Access Skills project team in the curriculum and research branch of the Victorian Department of Education, working with teacher action research around questions of literacy, numeracy, and social justice. She then co-led the Victorian School Improvement Plan, engaging teachers, parents, and students in school self-evaluation across the state. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Marie Brennan.
Thank you very much for this invitation. In trying to work through what I would start with, I wanted to think about the caring work that actually is the hallmark of teachers, as well as every other human services professional, but also people in communities. I want to also recognise that I'm not a specialist in mental health, but I have worked with and for teachers and others in schools, early childhood, TAFEs, universities, and in community organisations for over 46 years in trying to make those organisations more educative and more connected and healthier. And in recent times, I've been working with students and teachers as co-researchers with community on what my partner Lou Zippen calls problems that matter. Next slide, please. I too need to acknowledge that I am living and currently working in an unpaid capacity on the Boon Wurrung lands of the Kulin Nation in Western Melbourne. I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that their land is sovereign and they have never ceded it. I acknowledge all the important guests here today. I thank Minister Tian for his recognition of the work of teachers, and I'm particularly thank the Mental Health Foundation for the invitation, and thank the chairs, vice chairs and patrons, and Ms. Jenny Atter and other speakers here today, because I need to keep learning along with everybody else about how we do it. I also want to congratulate the organisers, not just on their other work, which is important and necessary, sadly, but also for the organisation of this particular event in the COVID times, and Nithya Viswanathan and the people who are behind the scenes in organising, the technical staff and everyone else to make this event possible. And I want to greet the teachers and students from all of the sectors who are here today. Next, thanks. Now, if those conditions that were announced before are important, the 50% anxiety and 20% depression rates among teachers in the school sector, this is actually much more than the population average, and we know that this is a long-standing issue, but it's getting worse. And COVID-19 has exposed, as in many other areas of our work, the injustices and the health problems that are part of those injustices of our society. These are structural issues. By talking about them mostly as problems of mental health, we often reduce their importance and make that appear as though it's just a problem for individual teachers. And that I think, and we talk about it as their resilience and their well-being, or which are important as indicators, but we actually have to go further than that. If we do that, it just lets the organisation and the society off the hook. It's not just an individual school or an individual teacher who actually needs a better way of understanding where their anxiety or depression comes from and what to do about it. It is that we need the society more broadly to not just ask teachers to make the kind of sacrifices they have, their health, their time, getting up at 4 in the morning to get stuff ready for online. Will I need online this week? Oh, no, I don't. Oh, pity you, you're in Victoria. And the rush to upskill and de-skill and use technology have all actually added the pressures on teachers and on their students. But on the whole, those sacrifices and pressures have been invisible. They've been largely taken for granted, along with those sacrifices of people in health and community and other human services that are needed to keep our lives going with the infrastructure that is possible to make in tough times. So we can't just rely on providing good employee assistance, help from your boss, therapy, and ask you to take time out when you need. We need to use COVID to give us the impetus to make the changes which are structural and systematic changes, and they've been needed for a long time. Next. Now, most people will know the story. Many of us will know it from Hans Christian Andersen, but it also was around in medieval times in Spain, and the Indian folk tales also have a very similar story. But the emperor's new clothes. Now, most people know that story, the fraudsters who persuade the emperor that the clothes are so fine that only legitimate and truthful people can see them. So everybody around in the court, in the public, goes along fearful of being seen as illegitimate or untruthful. Except there's a kid, a child watching the procession, who asks very loudly, "Where are his clothes?" And do we each need to recover and listen to the questions of our own inner child, of the children and young people we work with, when they ask the really important questions? Why are we at school? Why are we here? Why do we need to have schools, universities, early childhood settings, etc.? Is it just to keep them out of the way so that essential workers can do their work? No. We need to be able to name a number of key problems. So next slide, please. Because those problems, as I said, have been around for a long time, and the system is becoming, I think, more brutal and more skewed. It's certainly more stratified. The bigger gap between the top and the bottom in the school sector in particular, but also in the other sectors. Who has access? Who succeeds? We have to actually pretend that schools are there for everybody and that equality means equal provision. We can't even manage that anymore. Not that we ever have, but if you ever visit a remote Indigenous school, you can understand that really clearly. The standardisation that we now have for curriculum and assessment actually doesn't suit anybody. And yet teachers are being asked to just do that. They will actually be able to say much more why it doesn't suit this kid, why that kid needs something else, why we need to go more slowly, why we need to go in more depth. What else might we need to do? So there are also contradictory policies. For example, I was looking at some recently that we have a policy in most states about student voice. We're going to support student voice. But we also have a policy saying there won't be any dealing with contentious issues in this school or in any school. And we have a way of treating young people as though they should be seen and not heard. And as we saw around the environmental movement and school strikes on Fridays. There's also a lack of support for professional development of teachers, of principals. And while that's starting in some areas to come back, it's very much tied to what the system needs to show it's dealing with as a matter of sort of risk management than about people being able to manage and define what it is that they want to do. The normalisation of overwork, and having Australians are, before COVID-19, Australians have among the highest rates of overwork in the world, that's paid overwork, in the sense of they're in salaries. And there's a lot of other invisible and unpaid work that is needed to keep education institutions going. And there is a mismatch that results for teachers in particular, and that the workplace contributions to mental ill health often comes out of this mismatch about why am I there, what I'm good at, and what they actually have to do. One of the important things we have to remember here is that teachers are being invited to see this as their personal problem, their lack of resilience, their lack of flexibility. And we need to remember that for teachers, just as much as for students, this is a systematic issue. It's built into the system. Just as homelessness is a mental health issue, being Indigenous is a mental health issue. It's not that they are, being Indigenous is a problem, it's the way the system deals with indigeneity. Poverty, violence, racism, colonialism, sexism, and bullying, for example, are all systematic issues, just as much as toxic workplace cultures, the jailing rates, noise, the amount of noise that it goes on in many schools, for example, is extraordinarily debilitating, along with overwork and being made to feel that it's your issue. You are being shamed and made to feel guilty because you're a bit overworked, stressed, lonely. All of those mental health drivers need to actually be taken into account. Excuse me, I need to blow my nose. Schools are not organised. In fact, they're organised not to meet their purposes of access to all, and the consequences for teachers and students contribute strongly to ill health measures. So we need systemic work across the system, across our society, and we need to not take schools for granted. We need to change them. Next. Now, the way I've chosen to present this today is to think about care using the work of some key people in political science. Joan Tronto and Berenice Fisher wrote in this lovely quote in 1990 that in its most general sense, care is our species activity that includes everything we do to maintain, continue and repair our world so that we may live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex life-sustaining web. It's not bad for 30 years ago, is it? And care, in that definition, is a human set of practices. It's not about just emotions or mental structures. It's actually about what we do which includes our emotions, our bodies, our activities with and coordinated with others. Next, thanks. So Tronto has kept writing about this, and at the end there are some of the references for people who might be interested. She talks about the 5 elements of care. Caring about, that means being attentive, identifying what needs need to be met. Caring for means that we're accepting the responsibility for doing something. Caregiving means being competent in doing it, in doing that caring, especially as most people are, not doing that caring in ideal circumstances. Then there's care receiving, responding to the care that you get, to see if care is appropriate and adequate, and understanding that care is relational. You give back by receiving it properly. And her more recent addition to this elements of care is caring with. Who is caring done by? Who shares it and who does not? These practices, seeing care this way, is to emphasise the fact that there are moral dimensions to caring, and treating care as an ethical practice and as a matter of political importance. Their work, Tronto and people using her, is strongly influenced by gender and the gendered division of labour, because care and care work very much intersects with other forms of inequality and marginalisation. So migrants, especially migrant women, take up caring work, while others are able to exercise what she calls privileged irresponsibility. They get a pass out of actually having to care about, care for, or give care. They don't have to pay attention, accept responsibility, or share in the doing. And that might be because they're men of a particular age or class. It may be because they have money and can pay other people to care for them. Different people may be involved in all of those phases of care. Democracy, says Joan Tronto, needs to be filled with people who pay attention, who are responsible, competent, and responsive. Caring isn't, she suggests, not just about happiness, it's also about drudgery. Care is often delegated to those marginal people because a lot of it is quite drudge work. And I think we need to work towards re-equalising care as being able to expect both give and take. And so if we try to think about what education institutions need, they need all those elements of care. They need a democratic approach to care. So what would, for example, a caring school, this is the next slide, thanks, or education authority or classroom need to be? They actually have to be attentive to the needs. So what might need attention? A safe space, culturally safe, quiet spaces with access to beauty. They have to be places where respect and dignity for everybody is paid. We have to value all the dimensions of work, even that drudge work. People need control over their work, with decision-making made as close as possible to the people needing to act or affected by the decisions. We need shared focus and agreements. We need opportunities for our emotion, whether that's laughing or sadness or anger, to be explored with others and shared. We need opportunities for physical exercise. In terms of responsibility, we need clarity on who's responsible for what in the various forms that responsibility needs to take. And we need support for gaining and upgrading our competence in the provision of care. I mean, I think many teachers have had to upgrade their competence in thinking about pedagogy at a distance. I think that's been a really tough one. And it can't just be, it's not just an issue of whether I've got the broadband width, although that is important. We need to have participatory evaluation so that we can check that our care in our teaching, in our collegiality, in the behind the scenes work, our preparation, our assessment behind and marking, all of that, we need to see if it's effective and appropriate. And we need to be willing to call out the division of labour and refusing privileged irresponsibility from everybody, from the cleaner to the minister. Next, please. So democratic and ethical workplaces are important, because unless everybody has a supportive workplace, then it is inadequate for everybody else. So that means teachers have to work on the workplace they help to provide for students, for administrators, for cleaners and technicians, for the tuck shop servers and the sports coaches and all the other people who work there. How much control do people have over their work and their conditions, and how much participation is there in decisions that affect their work and their collegiality? It's not just among the teachers, but between teachers and others who work there, including our students. So we have to ask what structures and organisational forms support that kind of participatory democratic work that allows teachers and the others to have some level of control over their work and their working conditions, and not made that work not just made invisible and not counted as work. So then the core work of teachers is what curriculum and pedagogies and assessment would support them in doing that kind of work. And that is a tough one. Next. So in moving towards closing, I want to actually suggest that teachers have special responsibility for futures, because teachers' job is to work with and for future generations of humans as part of that planet. Don't you love that painting? I just got that from my friend Carolyn in Perth, and that's her Instagram account there underneath her painting, which gives me a chance in my workplace to have something beautiful to look at from inside when I can't get out very much at the moment in Victoria, apart from the fact that it's cold and being in lockdown. So teachers have to find ways to work towards hope, and that's really tough at the moment. It's very tough to imagine how we make our way towards futures, how we make our way to make a difference in new times with others and with our students. So for us, hope and a sense of future has to be practical, made practical. And that is part of the work of care, is paying attention to what kind of conditions are going to make it possible. Not some kind of rosy, oh, everything will be all right, we just go back to normal. Well, normal was never normal. And we don't need silly optimism, but we do need to be able to feel we can make a difference. We can't do that on our own. So that's our key issue. So next slide, please. We need to build future momentum. And here's a wonderful quote. I find it very helpful to have quotes from people who have made a difference. And this quote from Martin Luther King comes from his 1967 address to the American Psychological Society. And he's saying there are some things in our society, some things in our world to which we must always be maladjusted if we are to be people of goodwill. There comes a time when one must take a stand that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take it. My argument here is that COVID is giving us a chance to think about taking the stance that schools have to be better workplaces, particularly teachers and their students, because they are doing the work, they are doing work there. And Maya Angelou, in a wonderful poem which has been used in a number of other people's work, including you know, June Jordan and others, we're the ones we've been waiting for. Now, I want to remind people of that caring with others, when we get good at it, produces the moral effects of trust and solidarity. And that's a really important thing to remember, because we have to build at the moment where most of us are so busy, so overworked, that it's very hard, we turn inwards just to cope. How do we build our friendships, our alliances, our collegiality, our students and our families? COVID actually, I think, has helped build a different understanding of teachers' work, especially for parents and grandparents, people who have children of essential workers. I think it is given us a wider level of support which we can build on to say more publicly, this is what we need to do to make schools educational places, supportive places for the people who work in them, in order to build a different future. It starts in our specific sites, on our desks, on our Zooms, with other people. And I think the issue is how we actually transition back to keep that sense of connection and build it more strongly, so that we share an agenda for caring with others, caring for self, and doing so in a group setting. So next, I've got some of the references that are underpin this work, and I want to say thank you for listening today to me, and I'm looking forward to listening to further people. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marie Brennan. And as a gesture of appreciation, an engraved pen will be posted to you. We are now live on Facebook, so please share with your family and friends if you're not able to join us in Zoom. I would now like to invite Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell, Head of Students Education, University of Wollongong and Bright Representative. Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell is a senior lecturer in the School of Education, University of Wollongong. She represents the school and the university on state and national bodies that govern the standards for teacher education courses and their accreditation. A practitioner with over 20 years in schools, Nolene's research interests include pre-service teacher preparation, epilepsy education, and recognition of the individual, including self-esteem, pastoral care of students and teachers. In 2011, the Australian College of Education and University of Wollongong Faculty of Education presented Dr. Nolene with an Outstanding Achievement in Education Award. Dr. Nolene has presented and written both nationally and internationally on her work in this area. Dr. Nolene is a project team member on the OLT project, Building Resilience in Teacher Education. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell.
Thank you, Christina. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respect to past elders, present elders, and those who are emerging. And it is a great honour and privilege to be with you all today. Next. Bright or Building Resilience in Teacher Education was an OLT funded project that built on a previous project, Keeping Cool. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues, particularly the project leader Caroline Mansfield, as well as Susan Beltman and Tanya Broadley. And it was certainly an honour to be part of building this resource for teachers. This resource involved the development of a series of online modules aimed at facilitating the development of pre-service teachers' capacity for their resilience. And it represents a product that is the outcome of scholarship of teaching. It's important for the learning for pre-service teachers that is highly connected to the real world. Bright not only has applied or teaching outcomes, but has enabled the conceptual development in the field and is aligned with a research agenda with outputs in international peer-reviewed journals. Recently, with international colleagues, we have published a book with Springer entitled Cultivating Teacher Resilience. Next. As outlined, we're very aware that there are issues in the teaching profession, and I'd certainly acknowledge Mari Brennan's very wise words and coverage of the need to actually care. And I will be talking about caring for self so that we can be caring for others as teachers and practitioners. Some of the issues in the teaching profession have been highlighted previously about teacher quality, teacher retention and well-being, and of course, the obvious links with student outcomes. The literature does affirm that resilience is linked to teacher commitment, engagement, enthusiasm, efficacy, job satisfaction, well-being, and quality and student outcomes. Next. When we're talking about building resilience for self, students and other, we talk about developing resources such as ways of thinking and our behaviours, and thinking about those in the terms of being protective factors. And in those domains, we think about positive thinking, the power of communication and effective communication, in addition to strategies related to problem solving and social and emotional skills. We look beyond just surviving, and certainly during this COVID times, at times it seems as if survival has been our mode or our way of actually moving through each day. But this also allows us to thrive, and we look to respond to challenges with opportunities for professional growth and development. So often the resilience is described as a way of bouncing back, but in fact we often need to focus on the next steps, on moving forward or bouncing forward, and to thrive and not just survive. Next. A little bit of a snapshot about our Bright resource. This a literature review was undertaken of over 239 sources, and 51 key factors were identified in the resilience process. And these factors themselves informed the content of the modules. Next. And so what we developed was we conceptualised teacher resilience, and we looked at the importance of personal resources. We looked at the contextual resources. So we're looking at the individuals, and we're also looking at the context, the schools, and all of those parts of a teacher's world that in fact makes a difference. We look at the strategies such as problem solving, time management, and work-life balance, study-life balance, particularly in terms of teachers, and we're thinking of pre-service teachers, and also the ongoing expectations for our teachers to be involved in ongoing professional learning. And then we looked at the resilience outcomes, their commitment, the job satisfaction, their well-being and their engagement in the process. And we've heard earlier about the importance of teachers doing the best they can and doing what they do, which are amazing things. Next. The Bright framework is then built on these 5 modules. And so the B for building resilience, we talk about the importance of what is resilience and what are the strategies that we can use to actually support ourselves so that we can support others. The importance of relationships, of well-being, not only, as we've heard, physical well-being, but mental well-being. Motivation, the motivation to be there, to do the right thing, to be the best that we can possibly be so that we can support our learners to be the best that they can be and take initiative, and recognising the power of emotions, the positive power of emotions, but also acknowledging the emotions that in fact may bring us down. Next. The following slides are just going to be a little snapshot of what our site looks like. And certainly I would be encouraging each one of you to go and visit our site. And so it starts here. Next. The module design features, these were very carefully considered in the building process of the resource. It is personalised, and we'll see some evidence of that in just a moment. It's interactive, as in reflection activities, and so it's not static. It actually brings the user in to the discussion, and we're very much thinking about reflection as an onward and proactive way of supporting each of the users. It is grounded in the literature, and it's certainly connected to the teaching profession, which is such an amazing profession. Thank you. Next. There is a progress bar, and you see that in fact it gives an overarching about all the topics and the activities that are there. Next. There is a self-quiz in each of the modules, and it talks about what are your current resources. Next. And then it talks about a personal plan. And so, for example, in this wellbeing module, it talks about personal wellbeing, the work-life balance, and maintaining motivation. And dependent on that personalised quiz, it will direct you where to go first. Next. Through there are strategies, and so there's the opportunity to for the user to write in their strategies and to pin them and to actually maintain them, and perhaps at a later date come back and revisit some of their earlier responses. And then there are some pop-ups that come up about some of the following strategies, and so it is a support. There are scaffolds within the actual resource to help people with their thinkings and their future plans. Next. There are information and resources such as the Kids Matter resources, and we are thinking and always actively looking for new resources to update the site. Thank you. Next. Next. The recognising and responding to distress, and again there are opportunities to think about different tips, different support mechanisms as well. Next. And there are also little wisdoms using quotes that in fact may be useful for the users to think. Next. About little pointers for them to get through each day. Next. There is the capacity to pin to your toolkit. We're going to see the toolkit in a moment, again, as an ongoing resource. Next. There are also some scenarios, as in I'm feeling so stressed out, thinking about healthy lifestyles. What could you do? Next. And also building new relationships, and so much about our work with our pre-service teachers and our beginning teachers as well is about the importance of relationships to support self and support others. Next. There are feedback scenarios as well, and then next, and then there are responses. For example, if you are very keen to eat lots of chocolate, you may have to deal with other problems. Next. But coffee and chocolate may be comforting. Again, we're thinking about well-being in lots of ways. Next. And of course, then there is some positive feedback as well. Good to hear this isn't your only approach to managing stress. Next. Again, linking to the literature, talking about work stress. We've heard a lot about work stress and the impact of work stress on the work of teachers. And of course, work stress in pre-service teacher education as well. Next. Our links with AITSL about social support networks and social media. Next. And at the end of the module, each of the modules, there is a bright toolkit where all of these pinned items can be kept and downloaded for each of the users. Next. And a certificate at the end of the whole resource. Next. The Bright modules also have been are now available through the AITSL My Induction app, and so we're very honoured to have that as a part of our resource. Thank you. Next. And there has been an OLT National Teaching Fellowship about promoting resilience in higher education, with some additional resources added to our Bright resources, such as resources for our early years, 0 to 5, mindfulness, dispositions for effective teaching frameworks, arts-based, case-based learning, and contextually responsive approaches for career changes. And so additional universities have been actively involved in this area. Next. Obviously, we acknowledge the impact of resilient teachers for self, as in their self-confidence and self-efficacy, and for their learners, because we also acknowledge that schools are learning communities. They are there for the holistic development of our students, of our children and young people, and we certainly prioritise the links of welfare for teachers and students. It's been an honour to share Bright with you today. We do need teachers to take care of themselves so that they can continue to care for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell, and as a gesture of appreciation, an engraved pen will be posted to you. We now come to the panel discussion section of this program. I'll hand over to Jim Goodin, Vice Chairperson of Mental Health Foundation Australia, to lead this discussion. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome to all our panellists. I'll introduce myself first of all. I am Vice Chair of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. I'm a retired teacher and former school principal. I do have a lot in common, I have to say. I was fascinated by Professor Brennan's keynote address, and I'm sure we'll discuss that more during the panel discussion. But we do have something in common. I began my teaching career as a humanities teacher in a technical school also, Professor, and I certainly recognise the hallmarks of a fellow and former HUMS techie, as I would say. So we have that in common. Certainly welcome to our other panellists, Emeritus Professor Bruce Tong, our patron, Professor Marie Brennan, as noted, Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell, thank you for your guest speaker address. Juanit Pawa, who's Deputy Vice President of the Global CEO, Southeast Asia at Deakin University, and also Ravneet, also been appointed, I believe, President of the India-Australia Business Council of Victoria. Congratulations for that. Kelly Luxford, Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership. So welcome all of you. I hope this is a free and fast-flowing sort of discussion about teacher mental health. And when I talk about teacher mental health, I am, of course, feel free to include teachers and educators in the tertiary sector as well. So we've noted those distressing figures that over half of Australian teachers suffer from anxiety and nearly 1/5 are depressed. Currently, ABC figures show that more teachers have had work cover claims approved for conditions such as mental injury related to the pandemic than people in other professions, which is a very interesting thing. I want to just throw that open to each of you in turn. What are each of your possible beliefs in the possible causes and reasons for these figures? Perhaps if we begin with Professor Tong.
It's a very complex question. Greetings, everyone. And thank you particularly to the speakers today, very thought-provoking. Obviously, part of the issue is an individual one, and there's no doubt about that there are a number of individual factors that contribute to our mental health vulnerabilities or resilience. But I think today particularly, we've been reminded by a number of speakers, but particularly Marie, that mental health is also a systemic issue. And I'm reminded, particularly in schools, of things we've known before COVID, that, for example, the absenteeism rate or the school attendance rate at school amongst students, which is an individual problem, actually correlates very high with the staff absenteeism rate or staff problems. In other words, there are systemic things in the background. And so too, I think, with mental health problems. I really did like the quote that teachers carry the mental health of their students that Mike introduced to us. So at the moment with COVID, we're in the middle of a major system shaking to the way we usually function. Now, we've got some outcomes from that. One of them is we could all go get down the gurgler. I don't think that's going to happen, because we know when systems are profoundly shaken, there's a really big chance of what we call a second order change, and that is a change for the better. And I think, again, this notion of a caring community is one that we've got to think about very carefully. There's profound wisdom in that. Thank you, Marie.
Marie, would you like to add to that?
I would, mostly from my experience and talking to people and listening and reading stuff in Victoria. I think one of the biggest issues for teachers here is that teachers are used to having, the basis of teaching is actually not just knowing your subjects and having a repertoire of skills and pedagogical approaches, but you actually have to know your students. You can't teach people you don't know. And so one of the really big shocks in Victoria has been, how do you know people over the internet? You know, how do we understand what it is to know people at a distance? And particularly for people who were teaching beginners or in a school, newcomers, incomers, or new classes, as in secondary schools. How do you get to know people? And particularly when in the areas which are where students are the poorest, the most diverse, refugees, immigrants, Indigenous, rural kids, people with disabilities, lots of those systemic inequalities, they also don't have access to good internet or computers. And so for a lot of the teachers, they were getting up at 4 and 5 in the morning to prepare materials, or going down, organising through office works to go and print the things off and then getting them delivered to the kids because there wasn't any internet. So, and then that was also compounded by the fact that a lot of the decisions were made at the last minute because there was an emergency that was health, and we couldn't predict that. So they had no control over their work, the conditions of it, when they had no time to plan. That the things that have made the most difference. For many teachers, they'll stay even under awful working conditions because they love the kids and the kids give them feedback. And they are heavily invested in that. If you take that away and you then undermine the skill set that people are used to relying on, it's not at all surprising to me that there will be efforts for ill health or separation going up under COVID.
Nolene, do you have some comments about that statistic of work cover?
Absolutely, and I'm thinking that it very much aligns with the whole challenge of relationships, of actually having relationships that are positive for everybody. And so a teacher wants to have a relationship with their learners, with the children and the young people. A teacher also feels responsibility about assessment, and how can we be informed about assessment and how progress is actually happening, or if it's happening, if we actually haven't got the capacity to have relationships with our learners. There's also the isolation of relationships with peers, because teaching is a collective responsibility, and the importance of relationships is so important in school communities, not just between the teacher and the students.
Ravneet, now you're in the tertiary sector. I understand there are an enormous number of retrenchments going on in the tertiary sector at the moment. I believe that the National Tertiary Education Union, representing staff, says that 11,000 jobs are to be cut under current plans, and they estimate that perhaps as many as 21,000 job losses will occur by the end of this year. So feel free to talk about this issue in regard to the tertiary sector and what's going on there.
Thanks, Jim, and a very good afternoon, everyone. I speak to you from India at the moment, actually. I am right now in India, and I think it's a very difficult situation that we all are in. And I would say that, let me just go back to the point on the teachers' mental health issue. And I think that the sense of big responsibility that they have to carry is actually a big impact factor that causes the stress levels to be high. And I think that causes a whole range of issues in their personal and professional lives. When you get a sense of responsibility, talking to people and being in the midst of teachers, and having studied psychology, I think it's a big issue that needs to be dealt with, and there needs to be a proper support system, both formally and informally, that should be around to support specifically the teachers' issue in this sense. In the higher education sector, of course, job cuts at the moment with the pandemic worldwide is an issue, and specifically, I think with Australia, because of the economy and because of the size of the population and because of the impact it has on people's lives. At Deakin University, we've gone through a whole lot of this issue, and I think that people are struggling to deal with what is in it that I'm going to deal with in the now and the future. I don't think we can do much rather than just provide support, and I think that at the end of the day, the strength comes from within. And once you acknowledge and deal with the fact that this is what the new normal is, you start to relate to things and you start to think about what you can do to better achieve your results. Of course, systems, governments, policies, procedures are all important, but support from society, support from friends, someone to be able to talk to, someone to relate to, I think in the first instance is the most important thing for someone who's going through lack of resilience or stress around them. And we've seen a lot of that in the tertiary sector at the moment around the world. And I think that it is here to stay. So as organizations deal with this issue, as people deal with this issue, it's important for all of us to see if we understand it better, what support can we provide to people just around us, just within the vicinity, so that we can add some value to people's lives, I think.
Thank you, thank you. Kelly, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Look, first of all, thank you for the invitation today. Certainly the points that have been raised throughout the presentations by my fellow panelists have very much resonated with me. And I think really, you know, COVID has been, I guess, just another reinforcement that teaching is a complex job. The communities in which teachers and school leaders work in, they're complex, as are now the needs of our students. And so when I've obviously followed the COVID very closely, and one thing that has really struck me is teachers, school leaders are continuing to work so well as they do in working with complex communities, working with the complex needs of students, and wherein this is their own personal needs. Because certainly I think there's a lot of examples of where teachers, school leaders have had to pivot, depending on how the COVID situation has developed and continues to develop. And so, you know, I guess a couple of things from my perspective is, you know, is we talk about this new normal of learning. The teaching profession has stepped up amazingly. And I think one thing that for me is very apparent is that teachers are often very good at denying their own expertise. You know, they're very good at saying, well, the kids did the work, you know, the parents gave support. And I think, you know, I would encourage teachers to be proud of their expertise. And in terms of the support that's required, I think it's very much about acknowledging that it's a suite of support and resources that need to be available for teachers. And I think it was perhaps Professor Brennan who said, you know, it's not just about having a good EAP. There's a lot more that goes into ensuring that the wellbeing of teachers and school leaders is met and supported.
Thank you, Kelly. Now, we've received a lot of questions from the public as far as issues they would like to raise with our expert panel, but there are a few things I think that have arisen in relation to the keynote address and the guest address that really need to be discussed and certainly resonate with me. And the first is Professor Brennan's point. Is our educational system more brutal than it once was? Are we too focused on image and economics, is how I interpreted that to a certain extent. How do we care better for our students if we, as teachers, are struggling with an environment that it does not give us freedom and creativity? Would anyone like to address that issue?
I mean, I could start that one off because
Please do, Professor.
I do think schools are more brutal. I mean, when I started in the Victorian tech schools, they were brutal places because they were largely full of men who were interested in corporal punishment or had to be interested in corporal punishment. But that hid a lot of the other more systematic brutalities of you're not going anywhere, or you know, many other ways in which, for example, Indigenous students were excluded in different ways, not recognising themselves in the curriculum. I think there are some more opportunities to recognise people now, but the pace and scope and sequence of content is actually making it more difficult to connect with the actual students in our classes, and competitive and standardised testing, I think, has really got in the way. And I think COVID and the discussions about ATAR have, and the levels of student stress as well as teacher stress around getting into universities, I think has been has shown that up really nicely. And so I think we have to make them better, more human places, and less on that kind of line of authority, which needs to be built on a military model, which is more important for the 19th century than for the 21st.
And I must admit that at the end of my career, I was very much aware of that line management, that military model, if you like to call it that, was increasingly creeping into schools. I was also aware of the second point that you made, or another point rather. You made many wonderful points, but a point you made about the normalization of overwork. I certainly was aware that many teachers were staying back inordinately long hours, you know, to 6 or 7 o'clock at night, doing preparation. There seemed to be a competition as far as staying back, so that they wouldn't be seen as being slack. Whereas certainly when I was a technical school teacher, for example, you left pretty soon after the kids left, 4:30 or whenever. It seems remarkable the teachers seem to have accepted these requirements. Can this continue if we're serious about improving mental health? Would anyone like to address that?
I think this will need to change. I think that the society will need to accept the level of stress and the ability for teachers to be able to deal with that. I think the expectations have to be realistic. I think that the use of technology and the training needs to be better embedded into systems. I think there needs to be more support and care available for teachers to be able to deal with this. And the fact of the matter is that it will have to change, because the teachers are the foundation of what we want the children to be, and they have to be supported well to be able to support the children and the system. And if we lack that, and we actually, I think if we take that profession for granted and we assume that it is okay not to have it because they're only teachers, and it's fine to not have a systematic approach to it, or you know, like in the corporate sector, you know, you really have a very strong sense of a systematic approach to supporting recognition and awarding. You know, and I think that we lack that complete system, which is demotivating, which is not necessarily causing the teachers to be able to relate to the newness of their job profile and make it as exciting and reasonably engaging as it should be.
You spoke about the new demands on teachers and requirements of them personally. Kelly, I'm just wondering, do you believe that perhaps we should have more psychological profiling, or any psychological profiling of candidates before they actually enter the teaching profession?
Jim, that's an interesting question. What I would say is perhaps we need to take it a step back and have some discussion around what is the role of a teacher. Because certainly through the work that I'm currently leading at the moment, which Minister Tien referred to, one is a review of red tape, the other one is developing a national strategy to address the abuse of teachers and school leaders. And certainly through consultation with across Australia, what's come through really strongly is a fundamental belief there is what I would call a scope creep. In terms of the role of teachers, the role of educators. So I think that, you know, we also need to come back to what should be the primary focus of a teacher, and surely that is ensuring that how they spend their day is focused on achieving student outcomes. So it's related to teaching and learning. And when you hear and you seek feedback around how the profession sees how they spend their day, there is quite an interesting disparity. There's certainly what's come through in consultation is a lot of examples provided of, and I've noticed some talk in our chat here today around, teachers being asked to do more and more in their role. And I think there's a really good question to ask about, is that the role of the teacher?
I remember many years ago, there was a director of curriculum in Victoria that I respected very much. His name was Michael Norman. Some of you may be aware of him, perhaps you, Marie. And he was very much against, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I worked with him quite closely. I was working curriculum at the time.
A remarkable gentleman as far as I'm concerned. And he was very much against standardised testing. He felt that comparing students to bags of wheat or chaff, if you like, and trying to measure the volume, that was an economic issue. It wasn't much to do with education. But of course, now we have issues like NAPLAN and perhaps which encourages teaching to a rigid curricula or syllabus. How do you think this, and this is an open question to anyone, how do you think this affects teacher job satisfaction, especially when the best teachers like to be creative and focused on the individual students? Open question.
Jim, I'm interested also in that whole concept of the ongoing discussion about teaching as a profession or teaching as a lifestyle that you would adopt versus teaching as a job. And I think at times teachers feel quite constrained when they're actually teaching to a test. And in fact, we're looking at teachers being instrumental in the holistic development of little beings growing into bigger beings. And we talk about student voice that was noted earlier in this presentation, and so that's really important. And the importance of creativity and catering to the individual. How do you cater to an individual when in fact they're a cohort and they actually have to meet the test and be and reach those levels and be compared?
Yes, precisely. Thank you very much for that point. I think it's extremely important one to consider. In terms of teacher training, and I'm not sure this would probably best be addressed to Kelly or Nolene. Teachers, well, certainly I believe in the Diploma of Education course get, I think, 10 or 12 weeks still classroom experience in education. Back in the day, and my aunt was a teacher, she actually was educated under the monitorial system. Wow. Where they worked under a mentor teacher. Would anyone like to talk about that, the benefit of that, or the inadequacy of perhaps 12 weeks of classroom experience before teachers are let loose on our students?
Jim, I can certainly comment, because when I did my teacher training, I actually trained as a teacher in the UK. I was under a mentor myself, so my entire training was on a school site.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and so personally, I don't think I could have received a better form of training.
No.
And the reasons why I say that is because when I completed my training and post the training, I then had a substantial probation period, which was very much, an induction. And so I saw it as a continuing process of education for me to develop my skill as a teacher. You just can't compete with such real life experience. And to have the guidance of an experienced, incredibly skilled teacher who stepped me through, you know, all of the situations which now, with a bit of experience under my belt, I consider those situations the things that are most testing for us as teachers. So dealing with tricky conversations with parents, you know, how do you cater with, you know, in a class of 36 of, you know, an incredible range of needs. And so by having training that was just so real and practical, I felt it enabled me to hit the ground running, so to speak, and be a lot more confident as a teacher, where I needed that confidence than perhaps I would have got if I'd followed a traditional university-based teacher training program.
I'm sure you were far better prepared. I can remember during my diploma in education asking a lecturer, why do we only have this short period of classroom experience? And does that really prepare us for being teachers? And the person said, well, actually, it does prepare you because you're closer to the literature of education. And I thought that was quite an interesting comment, that they didn't place much importance on that actual classroom experience at all. And yet, of course, as all of you who have been in a classroom know, it's that actual classroom experience and learning from more senior and experienced teachers that really is the beginning of your educational experience as a teacher.
And Jim, perhaps that's something we've got to think about. We've got a system and it's far from perfect. Many professions do require on-service training, but I wonder if what's missing, and Jenny Attar might have alluded to this in where she referred to the fact that there's consideration now being given to boosting mentoring. I would take that as a part of continuing professional education. So whether you've had 12 weeks or 20 weeks of experience in a school before you become a teacher, that's only the beginning, isn't it? And I'd be asking questions about what happens after that, with the ongoing mentoring and continuing professional development of teachers, because it's through processes like that, for example, you could have programs of mental health first aid, which, for example, the Mental Health Foundation Australia offers. I think mental health literacy is something that teachers, some of them, are deficient in. And it's not a major thing to learn a little about mental health, you know, the value of exercise, diet, sleep, sharing things with others, play and recreation. These are things that could be emphasised in one's ongoing professional development.
I would totally agree with the professor, because I think that, you know, if you say pick up any other profession, if you pick up, say, a sports profession, unless you sort of prepare the athletes when, you know, with focus on psychology, focus on mental health issues, focus on diet, focus on nutrition, it's a holistic package. And I think that with the teacher training, it's not just about getting a teacher to understand how to teach in a class. I think it goes much, much beyond that. And I think that that's where the training part of thing needs to be really looked at. And you know, the point earlier made about whether we need to do more psychological testing, I definitely think that will help, because it tells whether you are up to it or not, because it's such a demanding profession, because it is such a stressful profession. You know, do you have the resilience or the ability to deal with it? It's not just as easy as it looks or sounds, I think. And I think that's where the focus needs to be going into the future.
Thank you, Ravneet. And that leads me on to another point. Teachers were once employed under public service provisions, which meant that they could virtually be assured of a lifelong career. And obviously there was an investment in becoming the very best teacher that you could possibly be. Many, if not most, young teachers are now on limited term contracts, or although the Victorian Education Department keeps this quiet, is a bit secretive about this. And some are fortunate enough to have permanency only in particular schools. So even teachers who have permanency in particular schools don't get the opportunity to experience a variety of schools as perhaps they once did. So what are people's thoughts about that? The implication of educators really being, so many being on short-term contacts. Professor Brennan mentioned, of course, you need to know your students. You need to know those students that you teach, and better if you know the family. I certainly know in my career, I would spend years at a school and I would teach every student or every child in a particular family. I'm sure that gave me an advantage. What are your thoughts on that?
I myself think that the issue of teachers requiring, as part of their job, proper professional development that occurs with colleagues. If I look at, for example, at what Queensland up until very recently has had in the senior school, they did moderation of students' work with other teachers in their region. They didn't have exams for year 12. That professional development built real capacity to analyse yourself and your own teaching. It built real understanding of how to extend students. It gave you a real understanding of what quality teaching and learning was, in a way that going off to a one-off or doing things with other schools would not. But I think we need a much better range of the kinds of teacher professional development that is targeted to both at the school level and, you know, in a regional area or particular subject areas and particular issues such as mental health. That kind of work used to be common. The Commonwealth provided in the 70s and early 80s, and we had a whole infrastructure of regional in-service education committees that actually, where teachers could nominate the things that they needed to know about. It wasn't about learning how to comply with the latest policy coming down from on high. It really was saying we need to be more assessment literate. We need to know how to teach literacy across the curriculum because so many, I mean, the last school I was at had 52 languages. How do we do that? How does the automotive teacher or the phys ed teacher work with people who don't have a capacity for literacy? That became something that was really important. In Scotland, they actually have a system where they think of teacher education as, and I prefer education rather than training, which is a very UK notion, training. I think you have to have both the breadth of education and the depth of understanding the practice that actually builds, that actually gives you that opportunity now. So in Scotland, it's 6 years. You have your 4 years of your degree with teacher education as part of that, and then you have 2 more years where that is counted as continuing your education. That's formally built in, and I think we could easily do that here in Australia. And then we need that much more systematic teacher controlled capacity to do local research, to work with people in your professional community who may be not just at your school but across your regional area as well. I mean, I remember in my first year teaching, I went to a National Teachers of English conference. I went to the local East Gippsland Drama Society professional development because I was teaching at Bairnsdale Tech at the time. I went to things in closer to Melbourne, and I was also able to come up after school on the train to come up to do particular pressures. And they also gave us time as first year teachers much more significantly to have time out to plan with others what you were doing. You had not just a couple of hours a week less, but you had a much more systematic agreement that your job, you had to learn your job on the job, and you had to do it with other people.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Yes, please continue.
Picking up on Mari's comments there and those of the others as well, you know, initial teacher education, yes, in-school experience or professional experience ranges between 60 to 80 days in our undergraduate programs. I think then we're thinking about a continuum of professional learning, that the supervising teachers or mentor teachers who are caring for those pre-service teachers need to be supported so that, you know, there is a maximum benefit for everybody. We've also then got effective mentoring, which has been discussed as well during the early times. But in fact, what we're also very aware of in initial teacher education are our casual staff. And so we often have people just on short-term contracts. We have many of our people who are just doing day-to-day. And in fact, they're never owned or cared for by anybody. So that's a really big systemic problem, because we also know that schools cannot run without casual teachers. And so I think the whole profession and care, if we're talking about an ethic of care, we need to be caring for all of our graduates, all our teachers, all those who are accredited to be in our schools.
Yep.
Do we have any other final comments? I'm afraid we're out of time. In fact, we've gone a little bit over time. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I have pages and pages of other questions I would like to be able to put to you all. But do we have any urgent final comments anybody would like to make before we close this this excellent panel down? All right, that's it. That's the quick and the dead. So I'm afraid you're all dead now. We'll close it down. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation in this panel. It has been excellent. I think it's been very, very informative. I think that really we only got started on a lot of the issues. We could have gone for an entire in-service week discussing these various issues, and you never know, maybe the Mental Health Foundation Australia might organise such a week. So thank you very much, everybody, on our panel, and I'm very grateful. And now I'd like to finish this panel and move on to another section of our very important event that we have here today. And before I talk about the winners for our creative school writing competition, I want to, at the end of that panel and at the beginning of this Creative Writers Awarding, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, elders past, present and emerging, and indeed all Indigenous people who represent a history and culture extending back countless millennia, and from whom the land was never ceded. Now, the next part of our program is the award presentation for our creative writing competition. This has been a national competition that has involved all states and territories of Australia, because it is, after all, a national mental health month. However, in this case, we're only talking about awards from 2 states, or rather 1 state and 1 territory, Victoria and the ACT. So I'll begin by announcing the winner of the upper primary category. And the winner of the upper primary category is Kate Sheridan. Congratulations to you, Kate Sheridan. And your prize and your trophy will be sent to you. The winner of the lower secondary category is Shwazna Elavasan, and she has done an excellent piece of creative writing, and we're very grateful for that. The winner of the upper secondary category is Nozia Hassani. Congratulations, Nozia. I do want to comment on Nozia's excellent piece of writing. She actually comes from a culturally and linguistically diverse community and is newly arrived in this country, so has experienced and in fact wrote of her experience of migration and the trauma of migration and how she had adjusted. It was an extremely moving piece of creative writing based on her own experience, and I particularly want to thank her for that work, and your prize and trophy will be forwarded to you. And then we come to the upper secondary category in the ACT. So we're talking about a territory here, of course, and Sarah Patil, congratulations. You have won a prize in that upper secondary category, and your prize and trophy will be forwarded to you. I'd like to conclude that section and pass back to our MC, the delightful Christina Chia. Christina.
So your trophies will be sent to you at your own home. So on behalf of the foundation, I would like to thank our speakers and contributors for your insights and your valuable time for today's symposium. The Honorable Dan Tian, Miss Jenny Atta, Professor Murray Brennan, Dr. Nolene Weatherby-Fell, Ravneet Pavha, Kelly Luxford, Emeritus Professor Bruce Tong, Jim Gooden, and of course our sponsors, Department of Health and Human Services of Victoria, Australian Unity, Vic Health, and congratulations again, our Australian Young Writers winners, and to all our patrons, our chairperson, Vasan Srinivasan, our board of directors of Mental Health Foundation Australia, our staff, volunteers, and attendees today who's joined us live on Facebook and also Zoom. As I close the National Teachers Symposium, I'd like to share with all of you an inspiring message I received from one of my students who said, "I cannot wait to go back to school to meet my friends and see my teacher." This is such an optimistic remark. Certainly, there are silver linings even in a pandemic. Despite these unprecedented challenges faced by our teachers and educators, I'd like to congratulate our speakers today for their insights, and no doubt, the mental health and well-being of teachers is extremely important. I'd like to invite all of you to join Mental Health Foundation Australia's exciting events held throughout the month of October across Australia. We intend to reach out and educate as many Australians as possible to help reduce stigma and facilitate positive, non-judgmental discussion surrounding the important topic of mental health in Australia. That is why it is important that you register and join us to celebrate Mental Health Foundation Australia's 90 years journey of promoting better mental health for all. And please share our message that #mental health matters. Thank you.